One of the more common texture map types is the normal map. There may be some situations in which you will have height map information for your mesh, but not a normal map. Fortunately, the ShaderGraph allows you to generate normal map data from height map data. To do this, you can use a normal from texture node. This node allows you to supply a black and white height map texture to generate a normal map. This becomes very useful when you're trying to add additional detail to your shader's surface to determine how it should interact with the light and how it should appear to the viewer. To create the shader graph, let's first create a shader to use as an example. So right-click in your project and select Create Shader PBR Graph. Then name the new shader Sample Graph. Double-click the new shader to open it in the shader graph. In the window that opens, right-click and select Create Node. Start to type in the word normal and click the result that matches normal from texture. You will now have a normal from texture node sitting in your graph. The normal from texture node creates a normal map from an image map defined by the input texture. This node has a single output and 5 inputs. On the left side of the node are 4 inputs. The texture input accepts a texture height map that will be used to create the normal information. The UV input is the texture coordinates. The sampler input is a sampler for the texture file. The offset input is the amount of offset samples from the texture. The strength input determines the intensity of the normal map and can be lowered to reduce the intensity of the effect. On the right side is the output from the normal map, labeled Out. Let's create a normal map with this node by giving it a height map texture. Drag and drop a black and white height map texture onto the texture box that currently shows none, or click Unity's browse icon and select the texture. Plug the out pin of the normal from texture node into the PBR master node. I also want a texture to be mapped to the material's color as well. So I'll create a sample texture 2D node directly by dragging a texture from the project to the shader graph. Click and drag the circle next to RGBA and drag it to connect to the albedo input pin on the PBR master node. You should now have a normal map created from the supplied height map. Now increase or reduce the strength of the normal map by changing the value. The default is 8, but I want a slightly reduced effect, so I will change the value to 6. Changing the offset value will modify the brightness and darkness of the texture to increase the contrast of the normals. Increasing this value will increase the distance between the areas that are pulled out and the areas that are pushed in. I'm going to change this value from 0.5 to 0.3. This is incredibly useful as you can reuse height maps and customize the normal maps generated from them. This gives you a good amount of versatility and customization. Everything will be connected in the final node of the shader graph, which all shaders feed through to be rendered out. The PBR master node comes with a small preview so you can see the final result of the shader. To finish your shader, you must save your asset. So in the top left corner of your PBR graph, click the Save Asset button. Then you can close this window. Create a new material in your project window by right-clicking and select Create and Material. In the Material window, select the Shader dropdown and select the shader you created. It's going to be under Shader Graphs, Sample Graph. Apply the material to an object in your scene. The Normal from Height node allows you to create normal maps on the fly within your shader. It helps add additional detail to your shaders to determine how they interact with light.